the journey of eons into now. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Mr.Within's Gift channel. This is a live stream. In this channel, I tend to existentially inquire into the nature of how a self perceives into the world, or how a self perceives the world. I want to begin by saying that we are creatures that the moment in our evolution we individualized, the moment, the instant we became a self, this self now had an activity it could do. Journey, it had a movement. It would start recording its movement. So you see, you're not just a thing in this life, you are a thing in various moments, and as you pass through various moments, your sense of thingness your sense of somethingness, your individuality in some sense, gets imprinted by the various stimulus and just the movements of your environment. As you walk, you pretty much become the space and move through. There is a quote that the ancient Greeks would say. They would say, to tame the savageness of man and make gentle the life of this world. Pretty much we started off our journeys in existence, in conscious exist. Well, let's say it like this. We started off from an unconscious individualism. We were creatures that had no idea we were creatures. We were just the programs of nature. As the programs of nature became conscious, we became a conscious program. For the first time, there was an ownership of the experience, of the existential data. Now, what happened is that as we began owning the moment, you know how some people say, like, own that moment, bro. We became owning the moment by classifying it in our experience and in the story of our life. If I tell you right now, put your story of life in front of me, you see you cannot. It is a subjective phenomenon. And we are objective beings. We're objective beings that are giving off a subjective aroma, which is our ideology, which is our psychology. So for me, the first thing, it took me let's say, 20 laps around the sun to fully recognize this, that I was thinking I'm an objective being only, just this physical creature. I went into that state of thought. I thought I was just a physical phenomenon. Then I kind of were like, okay, how do I know I'm physical? And then I noticed. It was a notice kind of thing. I noticed the subjective phenomena. So I have considered, especially in my own personal domain of thought, that there is a subjective evolution, which was not being taught in school, which is not being told to people. It's not just that the ape stood up and now we're here. The ape stood up in its mind. It stood up as an individual to the world. It separated itself from the world. The moment it separated itself from the world could have duplicate versions now. You see, so it's very unique how nature has moved, is that it has moved itself unconsciously towards, from a collective unconscious state to an individually conscious phenomenon. Okay, so we are the parts of the universe that can see the universe, that can see the universe in meaning as well. There's two ways you can see something. For example, somebody tells you, let me see, actions are seen with the mind's eye, the meaning, the value of actions. When you see somebody do something you don't like, it's not that they're doing something you don't like. It is the meaning behind your eyes that is choosing how they embrace that voice or that person. You see? It's not that most people tend to think they're doing the right thing and they're trying not to do wrong. But very few people wonder if their right thing is a wrong or not. You see, it's very hard to change your beliefs when you're defined by them. Now, the idea is not to change your belief towards like there's freedom. When I heard that it's a universal right, because we're creatures that we're not just creatures of form, we're creatures of that communicate forms also. And so there's a sort of freedom given to the mind's movement, just like we, in some sense, even though, of course, there's this world of ours currently in 2019 is far from perfect, but it has made strides towards a sort of clarity of itself to it has made strides in getting rid of ignorance, but there is still enslavement, slavery going on in different parts of the world, guys. And let me tell you, slavery is not just physical, slavery is mental. That means it's also mental, like it's a crazy act to do. It's a blindness. You see, it's very sick people require to control the outer too much. And there's two different efforts of control. There is a control that it's like a win-win dynamic. You're like, okay, I'm in this lifetime once, I'm walking this lifetime once, I'm alive once. Okay, there's a civilization here. There's this 4 billion-year-old science project, which is called humanity. I can contribute a little bit before I have to, leave this place. So you have been invited as a waking creature in the human species. And the human species is an idea, and it's an idea that was pretty much the glare in the eyes of our ancestors as they lived. They lived for something which they did not know what it would be, but they lived for it. Okay? And that's sometimes it's like a faith in your lineage, you know? This life can be seen as a test of some sorts. It's a test that changes you based on its results. For me, you can see it in a dynamic. If you're too much of a creature that needs a good story, you will be drawn towards, what can I tell you? Somebody comes up with a better story, you'll just replace your old story with that one. Okay? Our survival is not anymore just physical survival. You can't just be an animal. It's not like survival of the strongest animal anymore. It is survival of the most important value. That means if our species became all savage, animalistic, and violent, just like it was like some kind of violent situation, our species would not be surviving well because it has not seen where the value is. Okay, and this has to do with a sort of street smart kind of existential wit. What I mean by that is you got to kind of see where the value of your experience is. Usually, most people, their value in the experience, either they had value in the past and now they've changed and they're like, oh man, I don't have value anymore. Or they're seeing, okay, I will have value if I work hard and I just go do what I'm doing. So for me, it's the road of human effort has taken us into a sort of acknowledgement of reality where, how would I say it? It's like, how much do you care for the world that is here? A world has cared enough for your eyes to open. How much do you care for to open the eyes of the world? Pretty much responsibility has to do with our minds. It doesn't have to do with the body. Atoms can't be responsible for atoms. There seems to be something more, something that has, you can say it had an objective source and now it has led to a sort of subjectivity. But there's ancient minds as well on this planet. What I mean by that, is ancient ways of thought. You see, imagine right now, whatever society, you could be a person in Japan hearing my talk, you could be a person in Russia, a person in America, or you could be wherever you are. But I just want you to for a second consider the society and culture you're in, and just the way people behave as you step outside your house. Just wonder, okay? Just imagine in your mind, like you've had experience like living throughout a day wherever you are. So just imagine how people behaving. Now I want you to see that each person's behavior can be seen as a pattern. And this pattern tends to be directed by society, but some individuals, they tend to shift the pattern, and that's where free will comes into place. One can say if you're not free to do anything, you were never free from the beginning. You see, sometimes if you have like a car which you never use, it's like imagine you had a car in your parking lot, okay, and you're a person who rides the bike or whatever. Okay, and so you never knew you had this car, but all you had to do was look into like this basement you thought you never had. And so you go and see that the ability, the possibility is there, and it begs that kind of question, like that kind of situation where you're like, could the value of life also be in what it could do and it did not? What it had and it did not see? That's the problem. You see, it's of course it's fun to believe. Of course, I could see why there's so many people who are, in some sense, their minds are taken over by fixed ideology. I see that. Language is like a being. It's like this entity that is collecting controlling all of our minds. Without language, we are not people. Without communication, we cannot advance as a civilization. However, it's that situation where invented language as a technology, but now we think we are it. So imagine, like, the guy who invented the bike went on the bike and thought the bike was part of his body. Like, imagine you make a tool, you use that tool, and you hold that tool in your right hand, you use it, and eventually you forget that tool is a part of you. The moment we forget technology, a technology is our tool, there's the danger of us being consumed by that technology. You see? I've noticed this, especially, like, for example, like, there was a time when in my childhood, like, uh, people didn't use, like, cell phones. Like, I remember the old school days of the first Nokia phone, which people nowadays call the brick. I remember, like, when mobile cell phones were becoming popular. And what I came to see is that people, for the first time, I want you to imagine the first, let's say, group of people who had cell phones in society when no one else did. It was a behavioral evolution. What you play with changes you. Where your attention goes changes you. Most people are afraid of, they think they have a value now, and they think if they don't do certain things, if they don't behave in certain ways, they will lose that value. And physically, sure, this world is a changing world. If you don't somehow be a hunter-gatherer, in some sense, you don't survive. That's very obvious. The body has a certain external system. I remember I was talking to a very close friend of mine, you know, and we were talking about problems, and I was suggesting this sort of kind of layout of seeing a problem, that if your problem either has an external reason or an internal reason, you know, and an internal reason has to do with how you have constantly reconfigured yourself as an individual, how, like, the story you're telling yourself is suggesting your life, it is suggesting your abilities, your skills, and most people don't question their story. They never question their story because they think it's like they can't. It's like how society has sculpted them, and if they differ, if they think for themselves, then they're not with the thoughts of the world, and hence they're pushed to the sides of the world. I have been in situations where I remember just throughout this life, I've been in moments where literally the majority stole my mind. What that means is, before I thought what I had to do or what I really wanted to do, what would make me happy, I was like, what is the majority saying? Let's see what everybody else is saying. And it was unique because you have to hear the majority to figure out what technology is being used. What is the most advanced method and approach? In whatever you do, you have to just find the most advanced method, and eventually, as you try, you either find your own method or you advance the previous method. For me, it's very funny. We all acknowledge we're temporal creatures. We're going to die one day. We're all walking to our graves, as some say, even though it's a dim thought, but at the same time, it's inspiring. The moment I realized I could die was the moment I started caring about how I'm living. The moment I acknowledged my mortality was the moment myself became valuable. Because if we were eternal beings, then there would be a philosophical, moral discussion on, does it matter if you're eternal creature, physical creature? Imagine we were mortal physical creatures. Would be like, does it matter if you follow society or not? Does good and evil matter in an eternal framework, in an infinite framework? And you see, no. If we were physically eternal creatures, it didn't matter what you did. Nobody would die. There would be no values. There would be no sense of loss, no sense of gain. So, in some sense, our temporalness is a gift. It's a gift to the conscious being. It's like you have entered Wonderland, a wonderland called Earth. At least enjoy the rides that are present here. For me, something was very, I had this sort of paradox because I loved, like, I remember when I was young, I saw the movie Gladiator and by Russell Crowe, and that movie that made the general dynamic. There was that movie, and there was another movie called The Last Castle, which was, in some sense, it was military propaganda, but it was a good movie because I began to see the strength of an individual shifting the community. But then I wondered, how far does the strength go? And you see, those people who in your life, they have a different present about them, is because they have a different level of contentment with how the world occurs. A young child doesn't have that contentment yet. That means if a young child is given too much data before it can process, it will get angry. It will be an angry child because the world is bugging it in some sense. Okay, sometimes the most violent people are just children who shouldn't have been disturbed when they were younger. I'm telling you, cruelty is violence is a very unique phenomena, and to truly understand it, we have to look at behavior. That means this is why I like when Jordan Peterson came on, like the YouTube stage. I remember I was in 2000, since 2014. I've been kind of like, you know, trying to see what everybody in the world is talking about. And so when Jordan Peterson came into the global stage, it was a very unique moment because for the first time, behavior became more valuable than the content of the behavior. That means we started wondering, why does the religious person behave that way? Why does the secular person behave that way? And we came into in some sense, into the profound conclusion, and we will eventually get there, that we will find the empty state. The empty state is a state that is empty of linguistic existence. Some children might have memories of it, some people might not. This is not a spiritual thing I'm telling you, because what I'm telling you is it's in this lifetime. I have a memory where I remember where it was prior to thought, prior to language. I was just a moment of sight. This moment of sight, somehow with the intelligence in the moment, is constantly reorganizing itself. Just like when you get a wound and your body heals over time, similarly, it seems our subjectivity constantly reorganizes itself. But it doesn't reorganize itself if the free will doesn't choose the data. So we have, in some sense, either evolved into what appears to us as a soul, or we have, in some sense, been in the unknown from the beginning. You see, it's very fascinating. Without things that you don't know, you cannot feel like you know something. You know? Pretty much, it's like, let me tell you what Shaolin monks have in their teachings, and I am in some sense, through my personal view, certain of this. That the Shaolin warrior, the true Shaolin warrior, the Shaolin master, they also teach them Zen Buddhism. And any person who truly comprehends Zen, in some sense, is comprehending a sort of ability to observe prior to definition. That is primarily it. You observe beyond definition. So, in some sense, after the Shaolin monk, in some sense, has attained a sort of mastery of its physical movements and technique, it will have to, in some sense, attain a mastery of its mind. And the mind, it's not one of those things that the more ideas you have, you're better. It's actually the more ideas you can see that wisdom begins to accumulate as this, you know, this sort of cultivated experiential way of knowing what stories to accept and what stories not to. It's kind of like the metaphysics that we find, especially in spiritual circles throughout history. All those people who were, in some sense, called towards the unknown, and the first thing that most human beings did is that they shaped the unknown. They gained it, they had an experience that they couldn't explain, and so they put images over it. And this imagery is it's not just in religion, it's in everything. It has to do with the person's confrontational ability. What that means is like when that person was too tired to even answer, people thought his answer was silence. You see, we constantly try to contain meaning. We can't just watch the phenomena and not define it. And if we could, then society would be on it would be next level. There would be no violence because there would be enough awareness to wonder why there needs to be. Violence is an inefficient pattern. That's just, it's common sense. Something that took a while to get here, if you break it, I mean, why do that? For me, I saw a lot of movies that brought the theme of overpopulation. So the journey of eons into now to some is this overpopulated planet where there's scarce resources. And so this is why cruelty and evil will exist, because everybody's trying to get on the Titanic. There will be evil, there will be violence, because there is an instinctual urge to survive. Now, when you are convinced that what you see is the only world, you stop having what I say, it's like an ignorant, a multidimensional ignorance. Because you are choosing to define things based on one dimension of imagery, you prevent yourself from seeing many others. So I remember my grandfather, he was this kind of like business powerhouse back in the day, and kind of was like, he in some sense brought to life kind of Iran's leather industry back in the day when it was being pioneered. And he was just his whole life, like he was an entity. He wasn't drawn too much to like spirituality or anything like this. For him, life was about work. He felt life was business. It's as if that merchant who's been a merchant for 30 years, his son came and asked, like, why are you selling stuff? And he's like, because this is life, son. For that person who's been doing the action 30 years, yes, the action has incredible meaning and value. But for the person who hasn't been doing it, the value is not clear immediately, because there isn't all that layers of different experiences with the craft or the subject. So when I kind of asked him, my grandpa, like I remember him one day coming and giving this advice where he said, "Listen, whenever you're in a group of people, let everyone talk first." And I was like, "Okay, why?" You know, well, how is that like an image of leadership? When I was younger, I asked him, and he said, "Because you will see what everyone else is saying, and then you can say something." You see? So it was that thing of first observing the various ways intelligence moves, then choosing to be an individual, rather than first choosing to be a certain individual with certain beliefs, and then observing the data and being like, "Oh, I don't see it," So for me, it's that before you become a creature of belief, become a creature of observance. And that observance is going to be powerful. So since my youth, I was really drawn towards puzzles. I remember like the Rubik's cube took a long time of my like, and it was one of those things that some things have solutions that will suddenly be seen the movement of different systems. That means sometimes your natural approach to something, the natural way your mind is choosing to consider thoughts and the situation, sometimes Sadhguru says this best, this yogi on YouTube. He says that it's not about just doing what feels good, it's about doing the correct thing, doing the thing that has a result. And it's one of those things where you find what your intelligence to the best of your ability can say is correct, and then you study it. And studying is not memorization and regurgitation. Studying something is authentically wondering why it's there, which means that there's no, it's not like Frodo who's hesitant to move past the Shire. You just instantly take that step, and you in some sense become uh, an explorer of your existence into finding a sort of ultimate conclusion. If you ask a religious person the ultimate conclusion of life, they will tell you heaven. You ask a secular person the ultimate meaning of life, they will tell you it is to just be efficient and just help and be good and all. Perhaps it's or maybe it could take the one towards a sort of hedonistic value. Nihilists, their subconscious is very hedonistic. Those people who feel life has no meaning, their desires have been given full permission. That means they just need to be put in a situation, and they're like a slingshot, because there's no filter of their own individual conscious story of life to prevent certain actions. That means, I remember yesterday when I was giving a talk, I said the story of how there was this Zen master, and pretty much there was a group of disciples for this guy, and one of the disciples starts stealing stuff, and all the disciples get together, they go to the master, they're like, either you get rid of this thief or we all leave. And the master said, you, all my students, know what is right and wrong, in some sense, okay? But this man doesn't. He doesn't know what is right and wrong. His mind has not even wondered, has not even asked to see if the actions he's doing are correct or not. But you guys all know what is right and wrong. And he says, this is the student that needs more help. So you guys all can go. I will not let this disciple go, because he doesn't know. You guys know he doesn't. And so in that story, suddenly all the disciples cry. They're like, "Oh my God, such wisdom!" And so they find contentment, because sometimes you have to have tolerance for a system that cannot correct itself instantly. Hitler was impatient. That's why his rage began to manifest and snowball into chaos. He was impatient. The dude couldn't be like, okay, maybe I'm wrong. So that's the problem. For me, usually when I speak to people in society, honestly, it's just programmed language, you know, programmed language. Just go find how a culture is behaving, and just, that means, study the words of a culture, and you will understand how their behavior is. And you'll see most people are just programmed way of speaking. They don't, they, it's not that, it's like they don't even consider themselves there, because they're already too busy trying to fit into something that's not in their own free will. You see, I've seen people who have not cared for their emotions, and they have been swayed in different ways. I would see this in a school, and I would see this also outside. That the person was given a permission. It's as if it's crazy. A person who's suddenly rude to you, their subconscious agitation, which is not even conscious to them, somehow has been allowed to be open to you. Which means, like, there's different enemies. There's an enemy, like, think of, the person has to have an ability to defend themselves from not just wild animals, but also wild conditions of life. That means when civility suddenly breaks. That means there's every society, every civilization on any planet, either it abides by efficient decisions or inefficient decisions. Either you're doing things that are inefficient or efficient. Forget the good and bad, forget the hell and heaven, forget the guilt and all this, just either efficient and inefficient. This will eventually be the modern secular morality, that it's the efficiency that's important, and efficiency has to wonder about all the data. So suddenly that atheist or that person who was you know how they say there's some people who are sexist, racist, or whatever, they have some sort of discriminatory behavior towards others, it's like suddenly that person wonders, wait a minute, how am I discriminating about something I don't fully know yet? You see? And this is why to claim truth in a changing world requires balls. Because it changes. It changes. It's like the rugs pulled from under your feet before you could even know like what your feet were. You know. So for me, it's the sophistication of the language and intellect is not somebody is just gifted. It's a luxury. It's a luxury due to the person's character. And when we look at the character, it's very funny. Pretty much how psychology so far has developed, I see it like this, you know. And I find this in the grand visions and efforts of, for example, Freud, Carl Jung, and many different psychologists who wondered about the inner workings of the intelligence of the moment. And so it's kind of like this. Imagine a tree. You see the branches of a tree. You see all these branches suddenly coming to the trunk. You see this multidimensional reality suddenly coming into a singular moment of acknowledgement. Then you begin to see the trunk of the tree, the singular dimension, eventually goes into an unknown. What that means is you can't see the roots of the tree unless somebody, imagine you're the first person ever seeing a tree. You cannot see the roots of that tree. So similarly, it's as if like externally there's people, there's this multidimensionality. Internally it comes to one moment, one self, and then this self suddenly is kept with archetypes. Archetypes are the pillars on the foundation of your first view of life. You know, they are pillars that of it's like the moment you could make yourself into a self, then you began seeing others as their self, you know, as this individual self. The moment you did, the first data that hit you usually tends to become the face of your archetypes, you know. The first when you see a child fascinated by something, that child has in some sense generated an archetype, you know. Guys, I have to in some sense speak about how children are being raised on this planet because we all start from there. And it's very important, important, our relationship, not with our physical just body, not with our just with the objective data and phenomena of the moment, but also with the subjective data. And the subjective data is not tangible. It's like you can't put your mind on the table, but you know there is something there. When I for example right now, when I visualize, for example, let's say I imagine there's a golden balloon, you know, that's glowing, just like hovering in the air beside me right now. Imagine, like I just made that up right now. Okay, so now that thought has a design. That thought has a sort of subjective design, but objectively there's no balloon in this room. It's very obvious. So that's the thing. It's the subtler sensitivity. This is why I'm saying we cannot be physical beings, because we are seeing a design in an invisible room of our own making. So what I'm saying, it's like, think of it this way: the multidimensionality of our intelligence is the moment. It's like there is just matter, and then there is something that's being conscious of this matter, and we've tried to make it a thing. And that's our efforts. When we say consciousness is from the brain, we're saying consciousness is matter, okay, which is a paradox. This is why science will always have the hardest problems of consciousness, because it has a paradoxical approach, as if the mystery of consciousness has made the way we think about the world suddenly feel like the opposite right? So it's paradoxical. It's like scientists trying to study consciousness. It's like somebody trying to measure empty space. Like good luck. So the journey of eons into now is more a kind of tribute. The title is a tribute to Buddhist metaphysics. And Buddhist metaphysics considers this sort of eternally incarnating creature, and it's the behavior and actions in this plane of life that, in some sense, is dictating the value. For me, your mind behaviorally in some sense, requires to find salvation. It's as if your behaviors are dictating your decisions. How you behave is how you are being and how you want to have things. Okay? So you see in a lot of Zen tradition and Buddhist enlightenment talks, kind of like there's this notion that you get rid of this notion that you want to have things and have to keep things. Be open to change, or you will carry the burden of the past on your shoulders. It's like society is moving towards a universal comprehension, and similarly, the responsibility in society suddenly becomes a universal responsibility. You no longer judge people through thoughts. It's so relieving. It's such a breath of fresh air when this happens. You know, when you stop assuming knowledge in the unknown. That's the mystic's first step. That's the sadhu's chair in some sense. It is that moment where the individual stops the need for programs to fill life with meaning. You just watch it. You don't define something that is too dynamic moving. It's as if like there's a person not there's here I shared this story yesterday too. I'll share it now. There's a person moving on a horse. Okay, so let me say it like this: there's this bystander back in the day just walking alongside the road. Suddenly he sees this wild horse, not wild horse, this guy on a horse, and the horse is moving so fast. And the guy's just holding on to the horse, and the horse is moving so fast. So this traveler gets curious and he's bored. So he looks at this guy and he says, "Hey man, where are you going? Why are you in such a rush?" And he says, "I don't know. Ask the horse." The guy had lost control over the horse. Do you see? And somebody thought, "Oh man, look at the amount of like dedication this guy has and is going into towards his destination." But the kind of Zen moral of that is that that's kind of life. The elements of nature, the atoms that compose you, they are moving. They're moving naturally. And for the first time in evolution, you have an expansive free will. And I consider that animals and let's say what we consider to be inferior species they don't have as much of an advanced free will as us. They have free will, but it's like you don't see wolves being philosophers or wolves wondering if they should eat that tiny rabbit or something. Like we don't see the doubt. We don't see the amount of restriction that one imposes. You see, the thing was the story of freedom was fed too early to many children. And what I mean by that is when a child thought the only thing in life is to free everybody, be free, be free, be free, it put away this mode of thinking that sometimes bringing discipline and restriction on yourself is actually an ability granted by your evolutionary state. That means for us to not get our desires is one of those grand kind of like evolutionary leaps. And a lion cannot suddenly, the moment of killing that gazelle, just stop itself from killing it. I mean, there has been stories of like this, lioness kind of going to this pregnant female mother gazelle, and the lioness killed the mother, but because it killed the mother, it recognized the mother was pregnant, so the lion just went and it slept. Okay, it just closed its eyes because beside the dead gazelle mother that was pregnant. And they say the lion got a stroke, like the lion died or something. And I don't know, that was a unique story. It could be real, could be not, but it was just this kind of notion. I mean, like, their animals could be extremely conscious, or they could, through their pattern of design, attain certain states of consciousness, you know? Wonder about how the light of the world is in your eyes. Uh, Find an ability to confront your chaotic self and ordered self. What that means is it's very funny. Sometimes my mind is it animates itself a lot, just in spontaneous moments, sometimes. And what I mean is, like, I get my mind, like, you see, there's two sorts of way you can pay attention to your intelligence in the moment. When it becomes subjective, that means I could sit like for a whole day and I can live in my mind. Okay, I've done that sometimes. But there are moments where days that I wake up and the mind is pretty much silent the whole day because I'm just too busy doing physical activities. When I'm doing physical action, you see, nobody is a philosopher when they're running from a bear. They're just it's a kind of like the physical reasoning is the power of the moment in that situation. So but again, how would I say it? You navigate between various ways that your plane of existence is being moved. Okay? This is an idea I've created. I don't acknowledge the idea of meditators per se. That means if people came to me and wanted to know more, I'd suggest I'd say, first of all, you should see yourselves in the light of an advanced communicator and a pilot of consciousness. Okay, because the freaking enlightenment gurus that accepted disciples, they thought they saw the disciple and they could accept it. Do you know what I mean? That's the problem with the new age community. People have just changed their self. It's as if they believed something before. Now the belief has become a physical belief of a person in front of them. Now they believe in that person. For me, it's very important because there is a difference between polytheistic traditions and monotheistic traditions, and even to currently secular traditions. And so what it is that the polytheistic tradition is okay with seeing truth even in objects, but the monotheistic traditions are not okay with seeing truth in just objects. I mean, maybe Christianity can consider Christ to be God on earth, the objective presence of God. And it makes sense because fundamentally religion will come across even to the secular mind as a collective intelligence, an unknown collective intelligence that's is steering things, you know. It's like before we were just explorers of physical realms, now we should be explorers of non physical realms. These non physical realms appear as inner workings of the intelligence of the moment. As we study it, we eventually have to work with the ways we have classified reality. There is a quote in the Lotus Sutra in Buddhism that where it says, "Keep your mind alive and free without abiding in anywhere or anything," which means there is a freedom after the physical struggle and suffering, and there's the freedom prior. When you realize both these freedoms, it doesn't matter anymore about maturity or immaturity. Again, in certain spiritual circles, I remember this. Uh, in certain underground gatherings, spiritual gatherings in Iran, pretty much people were so restricted that they were conceptualizing beyond their restrictions and groups. Um, it's so important, your relationship with data and how you process it. That's the most important thing. I feel anybody who pays attention to that, they will have enough homework from their own intelligence that they wouldn't need others. That means, to be honest, my inspiration with these Mr. Within talks is not to have you endlessly listening to all these talks. For me, it is just to inspire you to understand why it's important to look in a mirror sometimes, to wonder about how your feet are paving your road, how your decisions are being you, and the value of ideology. Because when somebody is ideologically, let's say culturally cruel to somebody else in a different culture, that's weakness. You're seeing a weak being because that being is willing, is in some sense willing to. How can I say it? It's like you're pushing people when we're all stuck on this planet. So it's like there's no need, you know. There's no need to push anybody in an elevator. You can't push them out of there. They're there. I find just like how a vast amount, a vast percentage of actually, there's an incredible ratio we can see here. Just like how nature is preserving and a lot of your biological functions are involuntary, you can say that as civilization is being built, it is relying on a lot of it being involuntary. That means we're hoping that there isn't natural disasters. We hope that people can suddenly be efficient. All these hopes of that we're hoping, like all those people who are trying to save the world, they're only able to save a certain voluntary percentage of it. A lot of it will be involuntary. A lot of it will be regardless of whether we give talks or not. Nature will go organizing data in that unique way. So contentment is crucial, you know. It's like they ask the guy like, who were your ancestors, and he said probably the hearts of dying stars. That means we trace back our lineage. We will go to be a prior to our conception. The fact that I think life is a miracle is because there's something here. That means my eyes are open, but they could also not be. There's so many children who have not been born yet, and there's so many people who have transitioned through history. I want to say one more thing before I end off about the journey of Aeons into now. Pretty much whatever journey you have considered for yourself in this life, whatever past you're drawing upon, or you're drawing like whatever kind of past sense of past you're painting for yourself. Um, the value of your moment is always now. And now brings with itself a sort of freedom prior to the free will's decision choosing to shape a value. That state is pretty much a samadhi state. It is what I say, the state where the person is no longer burdened by thoughts, so their mind is no longer like a bewildered beast. Their mind for the first time is like the ripples of a pond. As Maulana Rumi, the Sufi mystic poet, says, like it's like let the waters, let the ripples on the pond settle, and you shall see the moon and the stars mirrored in your being. You shall see the truth of nature as you stop doing unnatural shit, unnatural things. Excuse my language. Yeah. So the here and now is where the party's at. Sometimes you might be stressed or depressed about your life. You might feel you could have done things you didn't, or you felt you could have many various ways of thinking. But It's like the only way to get rid of the weight is to put it down, and to put it down instantly. Don't be too attached. Don't be too detached from things. And when you can enjoy your own presence, then your intelligence has this, like your subconscious and your like there's a sort of freedom in your consciousness of how life will move for you. And as Henry David Thoreau says, it's not what you're looking at that matters, it's what you see. So when you look at your mind, it's not what you're looking at that matters, it's what's seeing. The seer of thought is beyond the thought. So thanks for tuning in, guys. And I think what I'm going to do is, instead of trying to attempt a sort of Q&A at the end of these, I'm just going to have the one live stream that's just Q&A in case anybody likes. So thanks, guys. Much blessings, and namaste. The greatest road of human effort is one that's efficient.